Hey, welcome back to Stinging Back. This is part 2 of the Michigan Supreme Court, State of Michigan versus Jade, as we're commonly calling it. We've got I'm M, and Norm from ICAC Unpacked has joined us.
Hey.
Now, this is the second part again. This is what the state's arguments are.
So last week we listened to the first half of this hearing and the defense presented their arguments. And so this is the second part, and now we're going to listen to the state's arguments. Are we ready?
Yep.
Good to go.
Good morning, Your Honors, and may it please the Court. Paige Petrosky on behalf of the people of Van Buren County, State of Michigan. Because our analysis under entrapment doctrine is focused on law enforcement's conduct, it's necessary to look at exactly what the decoy messenger had messaged defendant and how he had responded after the two had just engaged in small talk discussing the logistics of where to meet for the sex work to occur prior to the actual crime occurring. So the decoy asks, "Are you cool with younger chicks?" The defendant says, "I am." And the decoy says, "Okay, cool, because I'm 15. At this point, law enforcement has provided defendant with the opportunity to commit child sexual abusive activity, because if the defendant continues preparing to or soliciting the decoy for sex work after being informed that she is a child under the age of 18, he is then engaging in financing, arranging, attempting, preparing for, conspiring, etc., to commit child sexual abusive activity. And so in this exact moment, defendant indicates his immediate readiness and his willingness, but he also, this isn't all that he does. So, but in this instance, a hypothetical person who is interested in soliciting a consenting adult sex worker, but who is not ready and willing to commit child sexual abusive activity, would simply stop responding and end the conversation, or otherwise indicate in some manner that they are not.
But that wasn't his idea, though, right? That wasn't his idea.
It wasn't. He was initially seeking, at least nominally, an adult on the website. Skip the Games, although you do have to be 19 to create an account. There are no actual age verification procedures in place, and skipthegames.com is a website where CISA and related offenses is facilitated, as well as, and it's also, there's just been a number of cases in which CISA and CISA really, or
But
CSAM.
didn't the government plant this idea? Like, wasn't the government the entity that planted the whole idea of an underage person?
I think it's sort of akin to how in drug undercover operations, law enforcement might provide, say, some soap made to look like cocaine or, encased in cocaine. They are providing in essence, the contraband, but in reality, all they're doing is merely presenting the opportunity.
But wouldn't the analogy be the drug dealer walking up to the person and asking them if they want to buy drugs?
Yes.
No. So they'll, it would be it's more similar to like a People v. Williams or People v. Butler, in which the law enforcement is placing the decoy in a forum in which they have information that the crime being investigated is being facilitated, and then they wait until someone approaches them. So that already narrows down the focus of their investigation to.
Hey, can I make a comment? Okay, so you can see right away Judge Bernstein jumps right in there with, the predisposition issue. Doesn't being on a site for adults indicate that they're not interested in a child? I like how Petrosky here makes a distinction between, they placed the decoy in there. There's no extra person. It's the police, and it is their perceived target, whoever that might be. As we know, in many cases, it's not a preconceived target. It's, fishing. They throw the net wide. And he corrects her on that very important point as they try to switch the analogy around. So she tries to separate the decoy from what the police says, even though she says she admits at the offing that the objective test requires us to look at the conduct of the officers. So I thought that was a very clever way that she sort of, whether intentional or not, she tried to separate that out. But they're going right for the perfect questions that so many prosecutors just are never asked in these court cases at the trial court level.
Yes. What do you think about it, Em?
Yeah, it's exactly my thoughts. And I like how she stutters there a little bit, arranging her thoughts because she's not used to being asked that.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
Didn't law enforcement present this? The whole idea came from law enforcement presenting it.
Yes.
Right. And she thought that, again, like they're used to getting away with, that, as soon as she pointed out that the decoy mentioned that they were 15, even though they initially had said, I think they had said 19 on their profile,
Right.
or you have to be at least 19 to be on there. But remember, this is Skip the Games. It's an escort service. There is no logical reason for why anybody would go there looking for minors, or would know how to find minors on there. But if they do know how to find the minors on there, then it's police's job to be finding those minors on there.
Now, it's real important also to remind people, especially the trolls who may be watching this now, they're going to say it doesn't matter, they were told the age, etc. And there appears, even Mr. Doman admits that there's some indication that he moved in that direction of age, you could argue. However, and I would have the trolls note this is a legal argument on very narrow grounds. The question is, and somebody asked it when Mr. Doman, the defense guy over here, Jade's attorney, when he was speaking, one of the judges asked the important question. So if he is at what point, I'm trying to remember exactly how the question went, but at what point does Jade know this? Okay. At what point is he told this? And at what point does he take affirmative steps? Because if the entrapment existed before that, it sort of moves the needle more toward his exoneration. And that's part of what they're trying to decide here, these judges in these justices in this particular case. So it's not just whether you were badgered enough or pushed enough to do it. It's what affirmative steps did the police take to weave this elaborate scheme around you when you had shown no propensity to do it from the get-go.
Right. And that takes it back to the original question. Did the police create a crime or fabricate a crime that would not have existed otherwise?
Right.
And that's why this judge points out, yes, but whose idea was it?
Right.
Because it's clear that the idea of sex with a minor came from the police. It did not come from the defendant. The defendant, what he had in mind was a hookup with a consensual adult, and he went to the right place to find that. And only after they lured him and enticed him, basically putting themselves out there offering a sexual hookup for those who were looking for one, they first offered that, and then they changed the age to say, hey, are you okay with younger chicks? As if a real 15-year-old would have been on Skip the Games telling random strangers on there, hey, are you okay with younger chicks because I'm 15? That's just not realistic. It should be on the government to have to prove that there are, real 15-year-olds, real minors on these websites offering this to random strangers and informing them that they are 15 or 16 or whatever age they claim to be.
Well, where it started there. So, the officer says, are you okay with younger chicks? That could imply, hey, someone being 50 years old and being okay with meeting up with a 40-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
It's vague in that assignment that they put on it. So, and yeah, so of course, someone 50 is going to say, yeah, I like younger chicks.
Mm-hmm. And something, I want to point out something this prosecutor says that shows that she is either very manipulative or she's very incompetent at understanding this, very incompetent at her job, because she says she compares this to a drug sting operation. She says this is like in a drug sting operation, like when police, they are pretending to be selling the drug, but it's not really the drug. It's more like made up of soap, and so they make the person that looking to buy the drugs, they make him believe that they're selling them the real drug, but it's actually not real. It's just soap. And she's saying that it's the same thing. It is not the same thing at all, because in these cases, the men were not looking for a minor, and then police offered, what appeared to be a minor, but it's really not a minor. In these cases, the men were looking for adults, and then police stepped in and said, take a minor instead, because we need you to commit this crime for our self-serving purposes. And
Right.
so that's why the judge says, but whose idea was it? The idea of sex with a minor is clearly the idea came from police, not from the defendant.
But what's important for our listeners to hear too is that this case, like other cases, and I've argued before the Virginia Court of Appeals in my custody case with my ex too, because of the shenanigans they pulled. And with all these cases that I participate in, that I've seen, there's always a subtext. And this woman knows full well that police have down to a fine art of sophistication those drug busts. They lost some of those early on, figured out how to do it. And as I've said over and over again, for the stings, they have that down to a fine, sophisticated 5-point plan or so. And so when they're called on the carpet, they always revert back to these tried and true comfort zones. It's like a dog whistle to the judges. Oh, judge. It's like one of those drug busts that, we're always busting people on. But here it does not work because they have some key questions. And I'm not sure she listened to Mr. Doman's presentation very well. She comes prepared with some case law, but these fundamental questions, they go right at her. And by the way, as they did with me and many others I've seen, they will not let you finish your presentation. They got questions. They go right at you right away. And as we know throughout here, she's going to be hammered with questions.
Oh, yes. And so I have a question for you two. So what do you guys think? Do you think this woman, this prosecutor, is someone who knows very well that this is a lie, and she's just manipulative, and she's trying to gaslight the judges to make them believe what she wants them to believe, kind of like our trolls do to us? Or do you think she's really just incompetent and she doesn't really understand or know what she's really what she is really dealing with here? What do you guys think?
Prosecutors are paid to win cases, to prosecute. And I think they step over the line all the time. They have to be elected. When I see elected officials, including our own very democratic governor here, she came in by putting, a number of YouTube ads out there saying she's going to get those scary sex offenders. It's not at all beyond the pale that she knows full well that she believes Jade is guilty, but that it's possible he's not guilty. But she's not there to show whether he's not guilty. She's there to push guilt.
So you think she is intentionally being unethical? That she knows.
Oh, yes, I think all of them to some extent do.
Yeah,
sure.
because that's what I try to figure out when I look at, these lawyers when they argue on either side for or against these cases. I look at them and I try to figure out, is this someone who truly understands this and is truly, truly means well, is truly doing their best to understand this and to do the right thing? Or is this, and they, simply don't understand or know what they're really dealing with? Or are they intentionally manipulating, misguiding, twisting the facts, and gaslighting because they only care about serving themselves?
I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a bit of both. And remember, that's why she's there. That's her job. Her job is to defend
really nervous.
Michigan.
We'll see later. She gets really nervous And so I don't know, that kind of makes me wonder, maybe she wasn't aware and that made her think about some things, but she keeps going. So I don't
What do
know.
you
What do
think,
you
Em?
think, Em?
After years and years ago, taking debate in high school, you stick to your side, and that's what the prosecutors do. And gaslighting it does involve gaslighting. She's got to stick to what she's supposed to be fighting for,
Yeah,
and she has to gaslight.
yeah.
But these judges, they see through it by the questions that they ask.
Well, I mean, then let's talk about this. If she is like, oh, it's her job to gaslight, then that should show us that there's something wrong with the system, because either there's
Yeah,
something really wrong with her if she's intentionally trying to mislead and manipulate and gaslight, or there's something wrong with the system. But as a prosecutor, it doesn't matter. It's still your duty to meet the ethics of your profession, don't you think?
yeah, you're right, and that falls back on the system.
Yeah, and that's what it is. Maybe she's terrified that if she doesn't, manipulate and gaslight and, try to make the judges believe what they need them to believe, maybe she feels her job is on the line, and that's why she feels she cannot do the right thing and say, you know what, this is wrong. This case should not be prosecuted. This case should be overturned because I see your point. And yes, the police created a crime that would have never existed otherwise. Therefore, it is entrapment. Therefore, there is no case here. It's like she's not strong enough to do that, either because she's just not a good person, or maybe she is fearful that it would affect her career. Maybe she's been threatened. Maybe she's been paid off. I don't know. But I do like, that's how I think, and that's how I see them when I listen to them make these arguments. Do you guys want to continue?
Yeah, we can hit play.
Okay.
Just people who are willing to at least seek them out. So that already narrows it down. But then further,
But in this situation, the defendant never said, I like underage women and I like 15-year-olds. The government said that.
that's correct. But then at the point that the government says, okay, because I'm 15, all the government has done to induce the defendant or cause, beguile, any of the other terms that have been used throughout the years, all that law enforcement has done is to state their age. And simply stating someone's age is not the type of conduct that would cause or induce someone to then seek out a child to solicit them for sex.
But the age is what makes
Interestingly enough, I'm sorry to jump in. That's important. Interestingly enough, you knowing the age is death to you, though. But it's just fine if they just happen to throw that out. And I love how she said willingly. Okay, they willingly do it. So the fact that you're told this is the genesis of trolls and some in the public saying, well, that was your cue. You had a duty to immediately disengage, and the court has fallen into that too. Why is that now your duty to immediately disengage and not be confused, not feel manipulated, not wonder, wait a minute, you told me you were much, much older, and apparently if you stay, you're indicating a willingness. At what point does that change? We heard in the Curry case, one of the judges, you may recall, asked, well, at what point, maybe it was in this case, how many seconds have to go by before you get zinged on this, and there's a point at which you're ensnared in the trap?
Well, and what's interesting about this too is, did you guys catch that? She straight up says inducement. The
Yeah, I
government,
said that.
some,
Oh, but
something about by
my
stating
audio
that
was off. Yeah, I said, oh, you shouldn't have said that.
she said the only thing the government has done to induce him is
Right,
state the
right.
age. Bingo, that's exactly what the inducement is. And the
That was a
inducement,
mistake.
it's
She
an
should not
yes.
have said that.
I think Freudian slip, because she knows it is inducement. And let me explain this. The reason this is inducement is because they first solicited him for a sexual encounter,
Right.
and they solicited him as an adult. They presented a fictional character uh, who presented themselves as someone with the sexual confidence and assertiveness of an adult. They did not present a profile or a character of that represents a real minor, one who is vulnerable and one who cannot consent to the sexual interaction. Instead, they presented a fictional character who was very confident and assertive, who knew they knew what they were doing, they knew what they wanted, they had no problem showing that, and they had no problem soliciting random adult male strangers to engage with them in this type of sexual interaction. That does not represent a real minor. So that is where the inducement is, because they did not, had they presented a fictional character that represented a true minor, had they acted vulnerable, they're not confident, they're not assertive, they're not looking for sex with random strangers, uh, and that is because that's inducement, because they use the behavior of a sexually mature, sexually confident, assertive adult, experienced, obviously, and they presented that, and then they called it being a minor. That's inconsistent. So that is where the inducement is, that you behaved like a 40-year-old cougar, and then you called it being a, what did they say, 15-year-old. And so that's the inducement. That's like me claiming to be a 15-year-old, behaving, the age. That's like me not changing my behavior at all as the adult that I am, and then just claiming that I'm a 15-year-old, even though it's clear that a 15-year-old, would not have the experience, wisdom, knowledge that I have. And that's what they're doing here, and that's what the inducement is. And I think it's hilarious that she called it inducement, because she knows that it is inducement.
Right. So the defense and the judges discussed what the whole bait and switch is in these stings. And that's what you just defined. The bait is there's an adult talking to me. There's an adult talking to me. They're interested in the same things I am. Mm-hmm. Everything is going great, and you're intrigued and you're interested, and then they switch it to being a minor.
Exactly. And the only purpose they introduced the age of a minor was to create the crime. Otherwise, This crime would not exist. It was clear that the man was looking for a sexual encounter. It's clear that police know he's looking for a sexual encounter. The police offer him that sexual encounter as an adult, not as a minor. And, once it's established that this conversation is going to be about, us engaging in a consensual sexual interaction, then, okay, now that that's agreed on, okay, now I need to tell you that I'm 15.
And they don't use the terminology you'll see elsewhere, virtue testing, but that's exactly what it is. It brings up the real point that certainly is in the, the social scientists who write about these talk about the virtue testing. For what purpose were you going on there, setting people up on this? You weren't investigating a crime. You weren't looking for something, that some purported child who was supposedly on there, as Mr. Doman said, if they were on there hanging out, watching for children and trying to rescue them, well, that would be a different matter. But they're not doing any of that. They're weaving this elaborate scheme in order to try to boost up their statistics.
Yeah, and they're tricking the men into it, because if these men were really a danger to children, they would not have to be tricked into walking into this trap. They would not have to use adult profiles to lure them in. And they would not have to be acting like sexually mature, confident, assertive adults who are fully capable of consenting to this sexual interaction. They wouldn't have to do any of that. They would be able to easily, play the role of a young, vulnerable teen who's just looking for attention and wants to make a friend and wants to feel special. They're not acting that way at all.
That brings up another point too. People want to do things with the least amount of energy. And where would you have the least amount of energy? I pointed this out on my channel in rec centers with coaches and with, Boy Scouts and other places, Girl Scouts, where you have, youth groups, 4-H, where you have these relationships already established and you can see the person and you can see what type of person might go for it and what might not go for it. So, if you're going on blind like this, there aren't any of these sites where you're actively looking for children on the regular web. It's on the dark web or the deep web or whatever it's called. That's where you find these, and yet here they are. They know that they can. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. The police can bump
They're,
up their stats very quickly, which
they're
is the real
taking
reason they're there.
they're taking advantage because most people don't know or understand that, and that's why they keep doing this, and that's why it's
Correct.
important that we
Yes.
continue educating people about this. You ready
Yeah.
for more?
Yep. Let's go on.
Simply stating someone's age is not the type of conduct that would cause or induce someone to then seek out a child to solicit them for sex.
But the age is what makes it a crime.
It is, yes.
So it's not just a fact, right? It is the thing that makes it a crime.
Yes, but they haven't engaged in any conduct that wouldn't. Essentially, it would be stating that just the mere saying her age or the statement of the age would be enough for us to accept that would be sufficient to cause a hypothetical unwilling and unready person to go on and solicit the child for sex.
But
Okay,
that's precisely what they do.
Yeah, and let me
They
point
do
out that
exactly opposite of what she says.
she's acting like she's treating this like if somebody went on Facebook and reached out to somebody that looked like an adult, but they, didn't have an age on their profile, and then the person says, "Oh, I'm 15." Not somebody who's looking for sex, someone who's just hanging out, and then the man or woman, because there are women predators, um, they said, "Yippee, it's a minor. Okay, I'm going to start grooming them and convince them to have sex with me and convince them to invite me over to have sex with them."
Right.
That's what she's presenting it as. She is conveniently ignoring the fact that this person was soliciting a sexual encounter. They did that first, and then they brought in the age of a minor. And that is what makes it inducement. So, no, it's not just that they said, "I'm 15." The problem is that they solicited the man for a sexual encounter first, and then they said, "I'm 15." Had they not solicited the man for a sexual encounter first, then yes, that would not be entrapment. If she had said, "I'm 15," and they're not seeking sex and they're not soliciting the man for sex or demanding a sexual conversation like they typically do, then no, that's not entrapment. But because they present themselves with the maturity and the confidence of a sexually mature adult, and they are clearly soliciting a sexual encounter, and then they say the age, that is entrapment.
As one
That's
police
inducement.
officer said, "Well, if we said immediately, 'Hi, I'm 15. Anybody interested?' Well, they wouldn't do that." Yes, that's exactly right, because they're not interested in that. So
Why?
that's almost a tacit admission. So what we have to do is trick them. That's what we have to do. We have to weave this elaborate thing to get them to finally stay long enough so we can go, "Aha! I told you the age and you stayed."
They
It's
don't
the most
they
absurd
don't
thing.
ever say, "I'm 15, therefore I'm not looking for anything sexual." Notice how they don't ever say that. And you
Right.
know why they don't ever say that? Because they want it to be very clear that they are looking for a sexual encounter.
Right.
And that is where the inducement is. They present a fictional character who is fully capable of consenting to this sexual interaction, because this is not a real minor. This is an imaginary minor with the sexual confidence of an adult. And they are very assertive about it. It's very clear they know what they're doing. It's very clear they know how to find it. It's very clear they know what they want, and they know how to get it. And so that does not represent a real minor. And that's why this is inducement, and that is why it is entrapment. It's not just, oh, they stated the age. They were just hanging out, acting like a teenager, and they said, I'm 15. So that's where we need to keep the focus on. That's fine that they stated the age, but let's not forget the part that they solicited the man for sex. And this whole BS, it doesn't matter if they solicited the man for sex or not. Well, yes, it does. The government needs to prove that there are, minors this age on these adult sexual websites soliciting random adult strangers for sex. It should be on them to have to prove that. And that's what I want to see these lawyers start making these prosecutors have to prove. I want to see them explain that to a jury.
Let's
That would
hear
be
some more of her interesting arguments.
that would be very interesting. I really want to see how a jury would look at that. Hasn't gotten there yet, but we'll see.
So if because under the Michigan's modified entrapment test, under impermissible inducement, we are comparing the response of a hypothetical person who's not ready and willing to commit the crime, but who is in the defendant's circumstances. We're comparing what that hypothetical response would be to how the defendant then actually responded in the circumstance. And then that is used to basically evaluate how much inducement law enforcement actually had to engage in to cause the defendant to commit the offense, if any at all. And ultimately, it's a better determination of whether or not law enforcement was engaging in conduct in which a ready and willing person or non-ready and willing person would.
My concern on this whole situation, and I apologize for asking so many questions, but my concern over the whole situation is the whole idea of entrapment is that the government doesn't go out and solicit or encourage people to elicit or participate in bad behavior. And I guess the concern I have here is that if the government hadn't been the entity that said, well, 15, then none of this would have happened.
Exactly.
This would never have happened if the government hadn't basically said, created the opportunity for him to do this.
Well,
I want to clone this judge.
Really.
Did you have something to point out, Norm?
I just was saying I want to clone this judge.
Yes, because I mean, that's right on. If the government had not said, well, I'm 15, this crime cannot exist. And
we made this point many times.
yes, and what do the trolls keep saying? Oh, but they said they're 15.
Yeah.
A man is supposed to know to say no to these children. And they keep justifying that, that there are children apparently that are sex freaks who want to go online and solicit random adult strangers to meet them
If we had time, I would love to beg, borrow, steal, hire somebody to entrap these trolls in a scenario where they should have to somehow be able to read the other person's mind. This idea that they're so clever and they couldn't possibly be fooled by something is hilarious.
It would have to be a different situation, right?
Well,
because they know too much about I'm not going to talk to anybody that pretends to be a minor, because I know how that goes, because that's what we do to other people. But yeah, if you present an entirely different situation with the same, bottom line, you fell for it because you were told.
Anything, it doesn't matter what the inducement
I bet they would
is,
fall for it.
There's no way that anybody, it's like when people say, oh, I wouldn't fall for a practical joke. Everybody falls for a practical joke because it's impossible to be on your guard all the time in every circumstance. And we all have passing interests. And somebody could easily trick us if they wanted to.
You know what's funny, Norm, is that they have already fallen for it because they were told that you were found guilty, therefore you are guilty. They believed it because they were told. So it's the same thing. It's like they're just as vulnerable to believe lies, from manipulation and being gaslit. They have fallen for it too. And they keep, defending this, claiming that it's interesting because they will not straight out admit, now that I pointed it out, that, this could have been a real child. They won't straight out say it.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that? Because they know that this could not have been a real child. It would be extremely rare, because if this had been a real minor, the consent thing is out the door, because this imaginary minor is clearly someone who can consent to this sexual interaction because they don't represent a true minor.
Well, as we've seen with vigilantes and trolls, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they have had a lot of brushes with the law.
Oh,
They've
yes.
lots of troubles. I'm sure they have financial issues and personal familial issues and stuff. And the way that they escape from their own private hell is to visit some of it on someone else.
Well, and you can tell by the comments they make, right,
Yeah.
on our channel and on your channel. These people are abusers and they're used to getting away with it. And they try so hard, and you can tell it's driving them crazy because they want to get to us and they want us to be upset about, they want us to believe what they're saying, like they make other people believe what they're saying, right? That's what they're used to. They're used to
Well, it reminds me
gaslighting
of middle
people.
school,
And yeah, uh-huh.
middle school, it reminds me of.
Oh,
But
yeah, they act
these
like little
people
middle
never grew
schoolers.
up
Yeah.
somehow.
And it's driving them crazy that they cannot control and manipulate us the way they want to be able to do, because they are used to getting away with it with some people. Because, a lot of people, when you're not like that, you just don't know, you don't understand it. So it's easy to fall into that. But it's harder to manipulate and control us because we know, because of what we've seen, what we've experienced. And so, yeah, these people with their behavior are clearly showing that they are the ones who are more likely to be a real danger to others and more likely to have done, real harm to others.
Well, why don't we go on then? Because we got a little bit off topic.
Okay, here we go.
Sort of the crux of it is that all that they did was create the opportunity in this court, and really courts pretty consistently going back for as long as entrapment doctrine has been accepted, is that the mere presentation of the opportunity is not sufficiently inducing conduct in order to induce someone. So
what about the fact that in this case, and I recognize obviously these are very factually specific, but not only did the police or the decoy initiate the 15-year-old comment, which, to be fair, the defendant a couple of times said, no, have to be 16. I'm cool if you're older than 15 and you want to role play to be 15. But then it was also the decoy who initiated the sexual contact, right? The proposition of sex. So it had already been out there about the 15. If it was never, isn't it the 15 plus the sex? And both of those are coming from the police.
Right. So obviously the record is very clear that the first person to make a sexual comment in any way was the decoy. However, because the investigation was being conducted through Skip the Games, there was already the entire context of the conversation was the solicitation of the escort for sex. So if you look at
Okay, did you get that where she said obviously the first one to make the first comment about sex was the decoy? And then she follows up the profile they use or the ad they use was a solicitation for sex. So who brought up sex first?
Well, and it wasn't the decoy. It was the cop. The
It was the
decoy
ad
is
they
not a
used.
separate thing.
It was, have you ever seen a Skip the Games ad?
No.
Oh, did I send you, Em? I think I have sent one to you, the one that RuPaul used on Skip the Games.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was Skip the Games, but if so, then yes, I have seen them.
Okay, is it pretty clear that those ads are soliciting a sexual encounter?
Oh, yes, and we go over it in a prior episode, so if y'all want to find that,
I
they're easy
remember
to see
seeing
in
it.
our...
Yeah.
Right, it specifies what they are open to doing, right? Remember that?
Yeah.
In graphic detail, I'm sure.
Very. Yes. So for them, and then those ads are surrounded by very explicit photos of nudity, and then they use very graphic language about what they're open to doing. What type of sexual things they are open to doing.
Right.
So for her to say, to pretend like, oh, it was a decoy that brought up sex first, the government was soliciting a sexual encounter
Right.
with men,
Right.
and specifically men, because you have to specify on there what you're seeking for. So
Yeah.
they were not soliciting women to meet for a sexual encounter. They were specifically soliciting adult men to meet for a sexual encounter.
But
And now,
see what she's doing though, is she's taking out the word police, that in the objective method of
oh,
determining entrapment, you're looking at what the cop did. But she keeps saying decoy, and it puts in the minds of people that this is a third person or one removed. This is the cop.
that is a
Okay.
good catch.
This is what the cop is doing. So let's not pretend like there's some kind of intermediary decoy in there who's, who is, it almost smacks guys like the old 1970s shows, the way you're supposed to catch somebody. You have the decoy, there's a young girl, maybe 14, and a creeper who follows her home, tries to, get her to get into his van, and they've identified the creeper, and now they just have to get the evidence. So she, a real 14-year-old, gets on the phone and says, yeah, maybe. And the cops are in the other room recording it. Remember those whole episodes? Well, that's an actual sting operation where, you have a decoy. This is the cop pretending to be somebody else.
Right, but even if even if there is a decoy, the cop, the police, the government is directing the decoy to what to say and how to say it and how to behave and all of that. So it still comes down to the government is running it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is by presenting it this way, in my telling, I could be off base, but in my understanding of it, it is subtly separating the
Yes,
police from it, making
yes,
it appear that they are one removed from their own operation.
that's a very good observation. That's a good catch, Norm.
What they're discussing before they get into discussion of the age, it's talking about, are you free? Are you in pawpaw? Are you available? Because they are arranging to meet for the solicitation of sex to occur. So that context is already a part of the conversation. I would fully agree that if this was, say, a sting operation occurring on like Facebook or Instagram, which also has an age requirement, but children frequently lie about their ages to go on those websites, and CISA and CSAM are facilitated on those sites. If there was this identical conversation occurred and it was not in the context of someone already soliciting sex, I think the analysis would be different.
So what about?
Did you see how she actually made our point? I don't think she realizes she's actually helping prove our point.
Well, she's got to be very, very careful here because I think that they are at jeopardy there. And I also point out too, the issue of real harm to people. If you have first of all, fewer, according to some of the research I've read, fewer than 5% of the traffic on these sites are children. Okay. And of those, very few are, I shouldn't say very few, but comparatively few, because I don't know the exact statistic, want to meet. I do know there are lots of people who are, gay youth trying to just, express themselves and talk with somebody who is like them. Other people who just want to flirt and they want to talk. They have no intention of getting together at all.
Mhm.
So the endangerment is actually increased by what the police are attempting to do. And they're not just sitting there waiting to rescue some kid, as they say frequently in these proactive stings. That's not what they're doing.
No, but it's interesting that, remember she said it was the defendant that brought up, sex first, but then she contradicts herself because then she admits that the government was soliciting sex or a sexual encounter. And then she goes on to say, oh, yeah, it's different if they were
Well,
on
when
Facebook.
did this happen? That's the thing. When? When did they bring up sex? He's on there to have sex. He's not there to exchange, chocolate chip
Well,
cookie recipes.
They brought it up when they reached out because that was the whole intention for reaching
Right.
out.
Right.
But it's funny because I'm saying I don't know if she realizes that she's actually proving our points. She's actually proving the points
I
of the
think they
defense. She's
say something
admitting to
after
it.
this about that.
Yeah, she's admitting to it. So maybe she might just be really lost. She might just, not really
She's in a
understand what
tough
she's dealing with.
position.
Yeah, I just said she might just not really fully understand what she's dealing with, or maybe she's feeling bad that she, is maybe she's getting now convinced that she's been lying, or
I don't think so. I think she has to tread lightly. You can't say, no, judges, you're wrong, you're this, that. The narrow issue is she's still arguing that they did everything right and that it doesn't rise to the level of entrapment.
I think she's trying, but she just sided up with the defense. I think that's hilarious. Let's listen to more.
The examples that CDM cites in its brief of these operations being, now taught and used throughout the state on completely legal websites like you're talking about, like Grindr and Tinder and that, where, he did ask her if she wanted to go out for dinner. You might go on, it's not always necessarily for sex, right? And certainly on something that isn't billed as an escort service like a Grindr or Tinder or Facebook or what have you. These operations are being used on those sites as well.
Yes.
So this judge's point is, yes, this was an escort service site. It's pretty obvious that, people are on there willing to pay for sexual services, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. She's saying, like, he did ask her to go to dinner, which, that's not, just looking for someone to pay for just sexual services. He's inviting her to go to dinner. That's a social outing, right? And
I've made this point many times, when I dealt with my probation officer. No, you're wrong. The Bumble during COVID came out with a study in which they said that most of the people were not interested in hooking up or even necessarily they were open to dating, but they weren't pressed for it. They were much more interested in developing a relationship, a friendship first. So a lot of these preliminaries are dancing around each other, trying to figure out what's going on, which the police call grooming.
Right. And the police in these sting operations clearly show that, even though they're supposed to be playing the role of a minor, they clearly show that they have no interest in forming a friendship. They don't want to go to dinner. They don't want to go hang out in public. They want to get straight to the sex. And they're supposed to be pretending to be a vulnerable minor who cannot consent to sex.
Yeah,
so
that's a very good point, I think. Yep.
Yeah, that's where the inducement is. That if you want to make it believable that you are a real minor, and you want to make it believable that, a jury or the public should believe that it's believable that this man believed with certainty that this was a true minor, and that they didn't have doubts about it. And remember, the law says you have to believe that they were a minor, not just believe that they could be a minor. Well, the majority of these men are showing up to meet them because they want to confirm identity, and they want to confirm, what's real or not about the situation that they're presenting. And so they did not believe this to be a minor. They believed that maybe it could be, and that it was likely that it may not be. Therefore, they're not even meeting the standard of the law, and that's been overlooked.
Yeah.
So with the sort of the in-between between Skip the Games and Facebook, the sort of the Tinder, Grindr, on those sites, people use those sites both to find sexual partners, but then also to potentially romantically date or engage in these other types of relationships. And so if we are examining a investigation being facilitated on one of these apps or websites, basically we can't use sort of we can't operate under the assumption that the solicitation of sex is necessarily occurring. we would have to look at the actual, what the conversation was between the, the decoy and the suspect to determine, was the conversation's conduct, or
But why, I get that there's a greater likelihood that skip the games, that the interest is in sex, but it doesn't have to be. And so why isn't it relevant, again, that it was the police who initiated sex? There could be, an extremely lonely person going on there saying, you want to have dinner instead? Do you want to cuddle?
Well, that brings me to a thought right there. Can you pause it?
Yes.
Okay, so for my years of working nightlife, entertainment, and so I've had a lot of friends that were amateur models, etc., in the area. The label of an escort isn't prostitution. An escort could be, there's a lonely guy sitting at home. He wants to go out and have a couple of drinks. He gets on Skip the Games or any of those others and looks for someone that he can take to the nightclub with him, take to the bar, take out to dinner, be seen out on town with an attractive woman.
Yes.
So there are a lot of different reasons that people go on to this skip the games. It's not always looking for a prostitute. And I like that the judge is making that point.
Well, and I also want to point out from what I've learned about individuals who may have some type of sexual addiction, which the trolls have pointed out that, they like to pretend like someone with a sexual addiction is the same thing as someone who would force themselves sexually on others, but it's just not true. Those are two completely different types of people. But it also may be that some of these individuals, because if somebody has a sexual addiction, they get off more on the fantasy of it, the images of it, and just playing the fantasies about it, the sexual conversations and all that, than they do on actual physical sex. So some of them might be willing to pay someone, one of these escorts, to come over and dance for them, with or without clothes, I don't know. And then just let me look at you while I, satisfy myself, and then I will pay you for that. So some of it might be that. Would that be illegal? To have someone, dance naked for you so that you can get off while you watch? Does that count as prostitution?
I think that depends on the state.
Yeah, I would think that it would have to be actual physical sex, wouldn't it? But see,
Again, that depends on the state. Yeah.
that's something, because how would they be able to prosecute something like that? Because to me, I thought prostitution was you paid someone for actual sex, but it's like, what definition do they use for that? Does that mean they actually had physical sex, like oral sex or, penetration? Or if she just danced for him and, and he
I think
satisfied himself.
I think M is right on that. It depends on the state, but the question that Chief Justice Kavanaugh is saying here is, the police presence is still the operative reason, and this Petrosky woman has been unable to indicate that police are there for a more virtuous purpose. And that's the problem they have. She's in a tough bind, Petrosky, because she has to say all the things that the police do, but she's aware that these judges are going to hammer her if she says those things. So to prove her point, she has to hang herself in the process. And she's in a tough. I have some sympathy for her, from an intellectual standpoint. But
Yes.
she's toast as far as I can see, because she cannot defeat that question if she doesn't also implicate the police.
Yes, I started to feel bad for her the first time I watched this. There towards the end, I started to feel bad for her because I was like, wow, like she's up against the wall. She has no real points, because when the judges know and understand it, you can't gaslight them into believing what you need them to believe. And so, like you said earlier, she's in a tough position because she's dealing with judges who have done their homework, who have looked
How,
into this.
having gone before a number of judges, it is amazing how the other side crumbles when they get in front of a judge who is not willing to do the okey doke, to go along with it. When somebody they don't know as well, often in my experience, it was substitute judges who were trying really hard. They were auditioning for a main position and they followed everything according to the book. These people didn't know what these attorneys didn't know what to do because they had relied on the little game playing, skirting around nasty little tricks and everything, which went fine with the judge. In fact, you got the idea the judge was even in on it. And then when they got in front of somebody who didn't know these tricks or wasn't going to put up with it, they didn't know how to handle it. It's
Yep.
pretty amazing. So
And
she's
that's
kind of stuck right now.
That's where we're getting now. That's right. I do like how she's pointing out, though, like on Tinder and Grindr, those men that were on those apps, they were there to engage in lawful conduct. It's pretty clear because nobody's selling sex there, or at least that's not what these apps or websites are designed for. And so, even more so, police are going in there and completely creating a crime out of situations that were supposed to be legal to begin with.
Yeah.
But I like it that she points that out. This concludes part 2 of episode 23, covering People of Michigan versus Jayneel, Ravindra, Jade, the Michigan Supreme Court hearing. Part 1 was released several weeks ago, and part 3 will be coming up next. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out Norm's YouTube channel, ICAC Unpacked. You can find the link to his channel in the description for this episode, along with the link to the full hearing we just discussed. If you found this information helpful, please comment, like, subscribe, and share so others can hear it too. We do this because the truth matters. Until next time, keep stinging back.